Welcome to the Healthcare Intelligence Podcast, Myong. Today, we have such an honor to have you joined. Myong currently is a senior advisor at McKinsey, also advisor to quite a few health tech companies in both the payer and provider side. So before we dive into more, I just want to start and ask a little bit more about what you have seen from both sides. You have done risk arrangement at the payer side. You have stand up provider groups for value-based arrangement. What's the biggest thing you think that the payer side are seeing that provider side don't get today?
What's so interesting is on the payer side, payers I don't think really truly understand how few the actual doctors understand value based care. Um, they don't understand kind of what they've signed up for. Obviously, management does, but when you go talk to a lot of the doctors in their clinics, um, they don't. They know that they're in a value based care arrangement, but they don't know kind of what exactly. Sometimes they know they're required to do things, but they're not tying back. Hey, here's the reason why I have to do this lab work, or um, this is the reason why I got paid a higher bonus this past quarter, right? Most doctors are so busy. They're focused on taking care of the patient. They don't have that much time, and they hear about these contracts once every 3 6 months, and it just kind of tells you this is so critical for payers. It's really critical for the provider side, but there's so much more education that's needed.
A common thing we hear from providers is that they're too small to be important to be considered value based. What's your thoughts on that?
I actually think so. I've taken risk and given risk to groups, primary care groups as small as 2 to 3,000 members. When you really think about what the requirements are for a group to take risk, really you have to go through the evolution. And quite frankly, this is required for both parties to feel comfortable, both from the payer side as well as on the provider side. So you obviously start fee for service. The next step is what is typically referred to as P for performance. And that, in essence, is hey, do these activities which support quality outcomes, revenue, correct coding, etc. And then we will pay you some sort of bonus for that. It's really that is the backbone of can this doctor group, can this physician group actually do the actual mechanics to be able to succeed. It's not all of it, of course, but you have to be able to get 95% AWV completion rate with a recapture rate of X percent. The doctors have to understand what the HEDIS gaps are and why they're closing it. And once they've demonstrated that, then the next step typically is to give a shared risk, either upside only to the provider group, and then once they have shown that that works, then doing like a 50-50 type split between the payer and provider. And once they've proven they can do that, then going to full risk. So obviously there is a number of patients that are required so that you have a large enough risk pool, but it could be as small as 2 3,000. Ideally, you want it to be around 10,000, but it's not so much the size of the risk pool. It's really more the physician group proving that they understand the mechanics behind what has to be done, and then demonstrating that they can manage the financial risk over a period of time.
What's the data and infrastructure in place to measure that? Because we also know a lot of ASC, they don't have the best infra that's tracking a lot of the key ROI here.
Yeah, so what's interesting is when you think about many provider groups as they're trying to figure out how to take risk, be it primary care, be it ASCs, other, as an example, orthopedic surgeons doing bundled payments. They too are also taking risk. The big challenge is that the payer ultimately controls and has access to all the data. And being able to get access to that information timely is one big factor. The second one is having the resources to be able to truly analyze and see what's happening historically, for them to then figure out what is happening within these risk arrangements, what is the proper level of funding that's required for what the historical results have been, and then being able to negotiate a good contract, right? It really comes down to understanding the financial risk that's happening, and then you layer on top, technology, analytics, etc. But it really begins with: do you have access to the right data? Do you know how to analyze it? And then can you negotiate what appears to be a fair arrangement between the two parties?
Do you there's an even more basic question we hear from provider is I don't have a payer rep. Like how do they get in touch with payers when there's no dedicated liaison?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, obviously, when you're smaller, um, you have to reach. It's not easy sometimes, right? Peers will try to keep a smaller network unless you're able to reach out to them and, in essence, provide them some sort of value proposition. Why is it that they should include you in the network? It might be because you're an AAC doing specific procedures that might be of high quality, but also lower cost than the hospital systems that are surrounding you. That's obviously very attractive to a peer. It could be from a network adequacy perspective. You just know that you have the one surgeon in that area. There really is no one else, within that county. They would be interested in that. You could also, go to them and talk to them about doing some sort of value-based care to get alignment with them. So if no one else in your region, if everyone's doing fee-for-service, and you're willing to have a discussion around value-based care, that could be exciting for them too, because if they strike the right arrangement, there could be a desire to um, execute that contract and then send more business to you. So there's a number of ways. There are smaller vendors out there that can also support you, but they have the relationships. At the end of the day, it's hard work. You have to develop a relationship with typically that provider relations or network development person, and then be able to show them why you're not just another provider.
Right. And I think that's the value prop that people like we often hear ASC itself is value based, right? It's like just so much more competitive and better outcome for all parties involved. Um, and since we talked about like a lot of these measurements, I know you have been overseeing a lot of the tech transformation on the payer side. Most providers tend to think payers are very ahead because they're more organized, they're more capitalized. But I know you have a little slightly different opinion, so I would love to hear more about what you have to say there.
When you look at the technology stack on anywhere from the biggest payers in the country going down to regional health plans, you typically have very old software in place. Many payers are just too conservative. They're for many good reasons. They're not willing to replace systems whole. And so what has ended up happening is you have a hodgepodge of systems that are designed over a 20 to 30-year time frame with patches upon patches. And it could also differ by region. There's been so much M&A, mergers and acquisitions, that's happened throughout throughout the last 20 years that you could have a contract that works for one region because their claim system works for it. You want to expand that contract, the next region doesn't support it. And so then you have to figure out, it really is, the contract could be the same, the actual implementation could be completely different and take just as long. So the payers, especially the big national ones, have the capital to be able to start layering in AI to try to make things more efficient. But in the end, the base systems are still the base systems, and that's where a lot of the challenges lie.
And I think the other thing is you talked about the risk, right? I feel like most people underestimate how complicated these technology are. Over like 4 or 5 decades, there's a lot of patches that's built that makes it's really hard to just like bolt on an AI thing to speed everything up because the underlying infra has to work.
That's right. I mean, you could go into a lot. It's very telling when you get you ask for a set of metrics, and you get three different reports with the same metrics with three different outcomes, right? Three different numbers, and you know, it's and that is a result of having multiple data warehouses, multiple platforms, multiple different definitions of what a metric is, sometimes by department, and it causes friction both internally because you're trying to plan and see what's happening and kind of what do you have to do, as well as when you communicate and work with your provider partner. If you're sending one report out but working off of another report with different numbers, obviously you're going to have pretty significant issues there. And so, unfortunately, this is, AI is not going to solve that, right? I mean, to be able to um, make AI truly efficient and something that could add value, a lot of organizations what they're realizing is you have to go through the very hard work of defining, accepting, and then being consistent across the entire organization, so that you could then layer on top the AI solutions that will in effect make all of this reporting that much easier.
We have seen Wiser piloted run into some roadblock. We have heard more AI coming into coding compliance, review audits. Like, I would love to hear more about your take there. Like, imagine the technology we talked about worked or works to a better extent. Do you see payer auditing more claims for compliance reason?
I think you're going to see more auditing and compliance impact across the board, and there's a number of reasons why. One, there's been a lot of speculation that there's an AI arms war between both payer and provider, trying to quote unquote optimize on both sides. That's one aspect. It'll probably end up being net neutral, most likely from a revenue perspective.
When both sides get good enough, even out.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the payer still typically has more leverage than the provider, unless the provider is of a large enough scale. But it should be net neutral. Really, what's going to be driving um, what's happening is there's so much more complexity now, and changes happening at the CMS federal level. And then you look at what the payers have been doing around their products. And so when you think about where the big shift in membership for Medicare Advantage health plans have been, they're really focusing now on segmenting their chronic condition membership into special needs plans. The special needs plans all have very complex care management requirements for all of those members, which require a ton of data collection, as well as reporting, as well as follow up requirements for clinical care. And you, the payer is being held responsible for these outcomes. They have to be able to demonstrate that they're actually executing on these care management plans. Typically, these requirements are being delegated down to the provider, whether they know it or not. And then, if they're not properly documenting, if they're not executing, and or they're not properly documenting, it's going to trigger more audits, because they have the payer has to be able to submit that data at the member level back to CMS. And so that's just one aspect of it. Obviously, risk adjustment, it's been an issue for 10, 15 years. My expectation is that it's just going to be even more of an issue. CMS is clearly making changes to the risk adjustment model, going from V24 to V28. Likewise, they're very focused on fraud, waste, and abuse. That in the end, it almost always trickles down to the provider, and that's going to be in the form of more compliance oversight, more audits, more documentation, and the providers have to be ready for this.
You mentioned it may eventually be net neutral, but when we talk to most provider groups, they just feel they're pretty behind and they feel like they will never catch up to the payers. Any tips there on what provider groups can do?
I think this is why value-based, CMS and ultimately the payers are all trying to push towards value-based care. When you are right, if you're a small medical group, or you own one ASC, you're not going to be able to compete against a big payer, right? And so, getting alignment with the payers around driving for quality outcomes, and reduce cost and quality outcomes, and then sharing in those savings, that's where the industry is going, right? Because the fee for service model, um, the way it's working right now, it just there's no alignment. If and it's fraught with fraud, waste, and abuse as well. So I do think a big picture, you know, value based care and getting that alignment with the payer is how you're able to get, in effect, get more bang for the buck for the actions and the work that you're putting in. But like I said, there is a transition period that you have to go through to truly understand how to execute on this, and then getting that alignment with all the providers. And that to me is probably the hardest part. Signing the contract is actually the easy part. The hard part is then going to every provider on a daily basis, if not weekly basis, educating them on what the requirements are. Why are they doing what they have to do? It's not just the physician or the provider. It's basically their staff. Their staff is the one that has to understand what the requirements are so that they're able to enable the providers to be able to execute on that. So, big picture, fee for service arrangements. You get into, an AI, tit for tat. It's not going to work, right? It's just not a good outcome. It's not good. To me, you're just doing a more advanced version of what's happening already. It really is to everyone's benefit and ultimately the patient, to get alignment there.
And if you had to pick one, I know things are changing very fast, so we typically ask about 5 years, but now it changed too. If there is something that folks should focus on delivering for the next year, preparing for, what would that thing be in this payer provider ever changing world?
It's there. There's so many things. I think from a provider perspective, it's almost a mindset. And what I mean by that is it's very clear to me that there are already significant changes that have been coming through. When you look at the risk adjustment models, the payment models, look at the compliance, fraud, waste, and abuse, and then you also look at what's been happening on the STARS arena. There's been multiple lawsuits. Um, my expectation is that the STARS program and the HEDIS program is going to change significantly to straight outcomes based. And so there isn't necessarily one thing that someone, it can't just be one thing. For a provider to be successful, right now, 2026 and beyond, they have to understand that you have to have the baseline of the right data, the right analytics, the right physician engagement, education of these providers, and then be flexible enough to see and acknowledge what's happening, understand what the desired outcomes are, and then be able to use that physician engagement to continue to educate the providers on why am I now doing this? 6 months ago you told me to do this. Now we're doing something different. Being able to explain to them why. Typically it's going to be because CMS is now requiring this, and it's flowing through the payers down to the provider group. Having that mindset of being flexible and then willing to learn, but then also accountability. That's going to be, I think, what differentiates successful groups versus ones that are still focused on coding or just getting trying to close three metrics or something like that.
Makes sense. And thank you for sharing that. It's always a pleasure to chat, and thanks for joining us today, Myong.
Thank you so much.